Hi there, outside with my dog again. There is sun shining through the clouds. It looks very, very nice. However, I'm thinking about imagination and how limited the typical or almost typical imagination actually is. Because we can't imagine higher spatial dimensions, like 4 dimensions, 5th dimension, or colors that are beyond our perception, like infrared, ultraviolet, and so on. Also, imagining pure nothing is impossible, as well as infinite space. This is pretty frustrating, at least to me. However, even if we can't imagine those things, we can still understand them as concepts. We can explain them mathematically. Or you can create a sub-concept that supplies the thing you want to imagine or talk about or work with. Like you can, for example, understand colors as spectrum. You won't eventually be able to imagine the color like infrared or ultraviolet, but you will know that there is something like that, and you will know all its traits, how do they work, what they do, and so on, as well as traits of higher dimensions or nothing or infinite space and so on. So this is what you can do. You can understand it to its full extent. And personally, when I was trying to imagine the 4-dimension, mostly the fucking 4-dimensional cube or tesseract, because that is the simplest object to imagine when it comes to higher spatial dimensions, at least I think so, then I was eventually able to imagine it to some extent, and I can move in it in my head. Because first I read everything about it, like how does it look like, what it actually consists of, as I finally understood it as an object that consists of infinite amount of cubes, the same way like a cube consists of an infinite amount of planes. And basically when you move through the 3rd dimension, then you appear on a new plane through the 3rd dimension, and the same way you would appear in a new cube through the 4th dimension. And this way I was finally able to comprehend the 4th dimension, and I can move in it in my head. But that was just because I was really interested into it. I was reading about it. I was watching videos about it on YouTube and so on. And this is also my advice to you. If you really want to push the borders of your imagination and have something specific you want to imagine, then you must first try to understand it as much as you can. Because this will give you so many clues on how to imagine it that it's completely priceless. However, you will still most likely not be able to completely imagine what you want, just as I can move through the 4th dimension in my head, but I am not sure whether I really imagine a 4-dimensional object. However, I was thinking, could there be a way how to make your fucking imagination to go on a next level? It is true that there are people who can, for example, see more colors. There is such an ability, superpower. I don't know how it's called, but this is not really improving your imagination. This is improving your perception. And there are also savants who can imagine much more things than ordinary or almost ordinary people. They can, for example, imagine up to the 6th dimension and move in there and solve mathematical or physical problems in there which are much simpler to solve in higher dimensions than in the lower ones. So yes, this means that one's imagination can work like this. It is not finally limited by what we have. And the way that I think could at least temporarily improve your imagination would be taking certain psychedelics, mostly LSD. Because I remember when reading about science that Francis Crick, one of the co-founders of the DNA screw, I don't know how it's called, saw that fucking picture in his head after taking LSD. And when you read about many inventors and scientists and visionaries after the 60s, then taking LSD has helped them a lot in their discoveries. Which is actually logical because LSD creates temporary connections in your brain that must, logically, allow you to work on a new level, at least for a while. I am not sure whether this would work with N-bombs or some DOX compounds. I don't know. I am actually not a big friend of research chemicals. But search it up. Maybe it would. However, I would definitely prefer LSD, mostly because of its physical safety. Well, then, if you won't be able to eventually imagine what you want, either after understanding it to its full extent or taking psychedelic drugs, then there is another way. Because that doesn't mean that you have to throw your concept out, whatever it is, whether a mathematical concept, a story, a game, or you just want to imagine shit. Well, you can still create a provisory system from what you have that will supply your imagination. This means, for example, explaining the fourth dimension mathematically, or the colors as a spectrum, or nothing as a physical or philosophical concept. You won't be able to imagine it or draw it, but you will be able to get pretty close and you will be able to work with it. Also, what I would like to add, it might happen that you eventually create a concept, either a mathematical concept or a story or a game or a picture, anything based on these things you can't imagine that are pretty hard to comprehend, that basically require very high mental layers. And then you will want someone to look at your concept or to tell you what he thinks about it, whether there are some mistakes, and so on. It might happen that you approach someone who is hardly on the second layer, and then you will start explaining this concept, and he will tell you, wait, what is that for a bullshit? There is no fourth dimension, there are no other colors, and infinite space, that's just bullshit, you know? It doesn't work like this. This whole concept is completely worthless. If this happens, then don't worry. These people might just not have enough mental capacity or not be on a layer high enough to comprehend your concept, which doesn't mean that your concept is a bullshit. Therefore, throwing out a concept just because someone of whom you think as an authority, which is actually a trap, will tell you that it's a bullshit, that you really should throw it away. No, not at all. First, make sure that that person understands the concept and everything behind it. Question him or her about it. Ask him what would happen if X is Y, and so on. And if you see that him or her really understands it, then yes, your concept might eventually need some changes or might be a complete bullshit. However, more often it will happen that these people simply don't understand it and simply don't listen to them. It would be a pity if you threw out a complex concept just because someone who you think is an authority thinks it's bullshit. No, not at all.